Hello and welcome to my podcast, Heartfelt Praise, Embracing the Lord's Love with Deborah Thayer McLain. Heartfelt Praise is a podcast dedicated to exploring and diving in deeper to what the scriptures say about God and His amazing love for us. On occasion, I will use some of my books that I have written, Rescued by Love and Redeemed by Love, the Dia series, and show you a little bit of the allegory that I placed in those books in regards to God's love. In today's podcast, I'm going to reflect on a Bible story that many times we read quickly or often overlook, and I want to show you the love that God had during this short, brief story. The story that I'm talking about is the story of the leper that Jesus healed early on in his ministry. It's a story of faith and fear battling together. Faith, believing that Jesus could heal him, and battling with the fear of rejection yet again. Also, struggling with unworthiness. Now, as I usually do, I want you to imagine yourself in the story. It may be hard to imagine the terrible disease of leprosy, but when one caught leprosy, their entire life changed. They could have been popular and well-loved, and now they're scorned and rejected. So let's start by imagining. So imagine yourself happy and content. You have been blessed with friends and family, laughter, and joy. Parties at your house were a common occurrence. Your wealth even surpassed your goals, and you had nothing to fear in life. Suddenly, one day you wake up and you see a spot on your arm that looks funny. The skin appears silvery and yet dark. What's this, you wonder, and how did I get it? You go to the doctor, who informs you that you have the dreaded disease of leprosy. Fear strikes your heart. You cannot keep the news from your friends and family, and you certainly can't stay there as if nothing was wrong. That would get them all sick as well. So you draw up all the courage you can, and you speak to them. You tell them the news. But instead of being met with sympathy or pity, you are yelled at and shooed from your own home. The ones who loved reacted with anger and hatred. Get away from me! You are cursed! Don't curse me too! Stunned, you stumble backwards out of your house with only the clothes on your back. All of the shouting drew the attention of passerbys, and they all began shouting at you to leave the town as well. Turning, you see some of your friends in the crowd chasing you out of town. There was no remorse in their eyes, only anger. Outside the city limits, you stumble around aimlessly. You have no protection from the scorching heat of the noonday sun or anything to ward off the night chill. You tear off straps of your clothing to wrap the infected area on your arm, hoping that no one would notice. Several days later, you see a group of 3 men walking together. By law, you need to shout out, "Unclean!" So they had the chance to run away from you. Instead, to your surprise, they came straight towards you, because they were lepers also. You look in horror at their fate, which you knew would soon be yours. Their limbs covered in scars and fingers are missing, Blood-stained wraps could no longer hide the rotting flesh. A lump in your throat threatens to bring tears to your eyes. Seeing firsthand what leprosy does to a person fills you with compassion for the men and fear for what you will soon be enduring. You decide you might as well travel with them, and at least you won't be completely alone. Months go by, and you feel filthy. Every time you shout, "Unclean!" it just seats the truth deeper in your mind and heart. You were unloved. You're forgotten. You're despised and hated by everyone. Did your family even care you were out wandering around the wilderness? Did they wonder about you at all? Living through the scorn and rejection was worse than the pain that the scars gave. You wished you could just curl up to sleep at night and never wake up. One day, you hear of this up-and-coming new preacher. You would listen from afar off so no one would see you or get too close. And even though you could barely hear his messages, somehow you knew this man was the Messiah. He was from God. There was no doubt in your mind. He could heal leprosy if he wanted to. But would he want to? No, why would he care about a leper like me? I am condemned to die. The battle goes on in your mind, knowing that Jesus can heal you, but ruling it out. How could you even get close enough to ask for help? Several days go by, but this morning you woke up and found one of your leper friends died in his sleep. In desperation, you strike out to find this man. Once you see Jesus afar off, your mind goes into overdrive. What are you doing? You can't do this. He won't help you. On and on your mind goes until you're close enough to be heard and you fall to your knees and beg, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Imagine how you felt. The fear struggling to win the battle over faith. Faith winning out as you look into Jesus' eyes and hear his voice say, "I am willing." The NIV version says Jesus was indignant. I looked up the definition for indignant, and it says the feeling or showing anger or annoyance at what is perceived as unfair treatment. Other versions of this verse say that Jesus was moved with compassion. And I believe that when Jesus looked at this man, he was moved with compassion and indignant over what has happened to him, the unfair treatment that he received. See, back in those days, in the earlier Bible days, if you were a leper, you were scorned. You would lose your identity, you'd lose your friends, your family, your lifestyle, your livelihood, and you were considered an outcast. Now, a leper wasn't just an outcast. They were despised. They were rejected. They were hated because they were feared. People were afraid of catching the disease. Now here we see Jesus was full of compassion, and he reached out his hand and touched him. Usually when I read this verse, I have two different takeaways. Either first, I am thinking of Jesus and the miracle that he performed of healing this leper, especially how he reached out and touched him when back then nobody was supposed to. The other thing that comes to my mind when I used to read this portion of scripture was that the leper came to him and said, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." If you are willing. I have heard many messages pointing to the leper as doubting. They say that because the leper said if, he was doubting that Jesus could do it. But I see it in a different light. When I read the leper saying that if, that gives me a little insight to the fact that this man considered himself unworthy. He had been mistreated and rejected, pushed aside by society for so long that he felt as if he was not worthy of being healed. It's not that this leper didn't believe that God could heal him or that Jesus would touch him, because the very next portion that he says, the next sentence he says, "You can make me clean." Now let me read this to you again. Mark chapter 1, verses 40 through 42. This is in the NIV, or the New International Version translation that I am using. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." Immediately, the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. Now, I think this paints a beautiful picture of the compassion and the love that Jesus shared with everyone he came in contact with, but especially those that were outcasts, those that felt they were unloved or unable to ever get loved, as this leper probably felt. He felt he was condemned to never get loved again. And Jesus stepped out and said, "I am willing." I'm sure that when Jesus looked at this man, he knew what this man had gone through, what rejection, what hardships, how many people hurt him. He knew the reason. "If you are willing, you can make me clean." He had enough faith and knew that Jesus could heal him. He just didn't have enough faith to believe he was worthy of the healing. Have you ever felt like that? I know I have. I'm guilty of this. I have felt like I am not worthy for God to love me, or I'm not worthy for my prayers to be answered. But God, in His infinite love, tells us that we are worthy. He tells us that we are His children, and that as His children, He loves to give good gifts to us. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10 reads, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." God created us. We are His handiwork. And in Genesis, when He was finished creating the world, God saw all that He had made and said it was very good. And I'm sure He wouldn't appreciate it if we said that He made a mistake or what He made was not good. So if you think you're a mistake, let's read through Psalms 139, verses 13 through 16. "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depth of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body, and all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. Remember that the Lord knows the details of your life. He knows the number of hairs on your head. He knows the length of your days, the gifts and the strengths that He gave you. He calls you worthy of His love. And that, whatever it is that He calls worthy, can never be called unworthy. If you ever feel like you are rejected, despised, unlovable, remember this story of a leper who was rejected and despised by law among the people of his day and time. And Jesus went up to him and told him, I am willing to heal you. And it wasn't that he could, he wanted to. He was indignant with compassion, knowing that this poor man had suffered so much unjustly. And that is why he was at the point in his life where he asked God, if you want to heal me, I know you can. I'm sure that broke Jesus' heart to hear him say it that way. And if you feel like you're in that place, know that God sees you and He knows everything that you have struggled with, everything that you have gone through in life, and He calls you worthy. He calls you His child, and He loves you, and nothing can take that away from you. Well, I hope this podcast has encouraged you. So please, if you liked it, subscribe, tell your friends about it, share it with others. Let's get the good news of God and His amazing love out there to others.